Dilisa Martinez sat in the control room of the Arecibo 2 space station, watching endless streams of data flow across her screens. She had been doing this job for 8 years now, and most days brought nothing but cosmic noise and the occasional pulsar signal. The coffee in her cup had gone cold hours ago, but she barely noticed as her trained eyes scanned the incoming transmissions from deep space. At exactly 3:15 in the morning Earth time, something changed. The regular pattern of background radiation suddenly showed a spike that made Lisa sit up straight in her chair. This was different from anything she had seen before. The signal had structure and purpose, unlike the random chaos of natural space phenomena. Lisa quickly ran the signal through the computer analysis systems, while her heart began to beat faster. The pattern repeated every 37 seconds with mathematical precision that could only come from intelligent design. She called her supervisor, Dr. Amy Foster, who arrived at the station within 20 minutes looking concerned. 2 women worked together to decode the mysterious transmission, using every linguistic algorithm and mathematical model they had available. After 6 hours of intense work, they finally broke through the alien encryption. What they found made both scientists stare at their screens in shock and disbelief. The message was a desperate cry for help from the species, calling themselves the Ilani. Their star system, designated Kepler 442, was under attack by something they called the Vrak Empire. The aliens described massive bioships that consumed entire planets and enslaved or killed every living thing they encountered. The Ilani had broadcast their distress call across the galaxy, hoping someone might hear and come to their aid. Lisa immediately contacted the Earth Defense Force headquarters, where Captain Jake Sullivan was on duty that night. Jake had served in the military for 15 years and had seen combat in the Mars colonies, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The idea that aliens existed was shocking enough, but the thought that they needed help from humanity was almost impossible to believe. Within 2 hours, President Helen Davis was awakened in the White House and briefed on the situation. She gathered her top advisors and military commanders for an emergency meeting that would change the course of human history. The debate was intense, with some arguing that humanity should stay hidden, while others insisted they had a moral duty to help. Admiral Frank Rogers commanded the Earth Defense Fleet, which consisted of 12 of the most advanced warships ever built by human hands. These vessels had been designed to protect Earth from potential alien threats, but no one had imagined they might be used to help aliens fight other aliens. The ships were equipped with kinetic weapons that could fire tungsten rods at incredible speeds, along with plasma cannons and experimental quantum torpedoes. The decision was made quickly once President Davis reviewed all the available information. Operation Guardian Angel was authorized, with Admiral Rogers given complete authority to take whatever action he deemed necessary. Humanity would answer the alien distress call, even though they had no idea what they were getting themselves into. News was kept secret from the general population, while military bases across Earth erupted into frantic activity. Soldiers who had trained for years in theoretical alien combat scenarios suddenly found themselves preparing for the real thing. Marines practiced zero-gravity boarding actions, while pilots ran simulation after simulation of space combat against unknown enemy vessels. Colonel Ben Martinez led the ground forces who would be deployed if the situation required planetary assault. His men and women were the best trained soldiers Earth had ever produced, having grown up in the harsh environment of their home planet. They had fought in the asteroid wars and the lunar rebellions, but this would be their first mission beyond the solar system. Dr. Amy Foster worked around the clock, developing countermeasures for biological weapons after the Ilani described how the Vrak used deadly toxins and diseases as part of their conquest strategy. She created vaccination protocols and protective equipment based on the limited information available about alien biology. 12 ships of the human fleet began loading supplies and personnel for what could be a journey of many months. The USS Liberty served as the flagship, carrying Admiral Rogers and 2,000 of Earth's finest soldiers. The other vessels included destroyers, cruisers, and support ships, each one representing the pinnacle of human military technology. Major Kate Thompson led the intelligence division that worked frantically to learn everything possible about both the Ilani and their Vrak enemies. The aliens had provided detailed star charts and tactical information about Vrak combat methods, but many questions remained unanswered. The humans would be fighting blind against an enemy they had never seen. As the fleet prepared to depart Earth, the weight of the mission became clear to everyone involved. Humanity was about to reveal itself to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible, by coming to the aid of strangers who lived dozens of light years away. There would be no going back once they left the solar system. The Ilani continued broadcasting their distress signals, but each transmission seemed weaker than the last. Time was running out as the Vrak invasion force systematically destroyed one world after another. The aliens described scenes of horror as bioships landed on populated planets and began harvesting everything that lived. Admiral Rogers stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty as the final preparations were completed. His crew of seasoned veterans had trained for this moment their entire careers, but the reality of leading humanity's first interstellar military mission was almost overwhelming. The responsibility for the lives of his soldiers and the potential future of his species rested on his shoulders. The departure from Earth orbit was witnessed by millions of people who still had no idea what was really happening. The official story claimed the fleet was conducting extended training exercises in the outer solar system. Only a handful of government officials and military leaders knew that 12 human warships were about to travel further from home than any human had ever gone. As the ships engaged their hyperspace drives and disappeared into the void, Dr. Lisa Martinez continued monitoring the alien transmissions from her station. She had started this day as a simple radio astronomer looking for signs of intelligent life among the stars. Now she was the woman who had received humanity's first alien distress call and helped launch their species into galactic affairs. The sleeping giant of Earth had awakened to the sound of strangers calling for help across the dark emptiness of space. Humanity was about to discover that the galaxy was a dangerous place filled with predators and prey. They were also about to show the universe what happened when someone threatened innocent people while humans were listening. The journey to the Kepler system would take 8 months through hyperspace, but the real journey had already begun. Earth's children were heading to war among the stars, carrying with them all the hopes and fears of their species. They had no idea that they were about to become the galaxy's most unexpected saviors. The 12 ships of the human fleet moved through hyperspace like ghosts traveling between dimensions. Admiral Frank Rogers stood in the observation deck of the USS Liberty, watching the strange colors and impossible geometries that existed in the space between spaces. 8 months was a long time to travel even at faster than light speeds, and every day brought new challenges for the crew. Major Kate Thompson had converted the ship's main conference room into an intelligence center where she worked with her team to analyze every scrap of information about their enemies. The Ilani had provided detailed records of 17 star systems that had fallen to the Vrak Empire over the past 50 years. Each conquest followed the same terrible pattern of overwhelming force, followed by complete harvesting of all biological resources. The Vrek themselves were unlike anything humanity had encountered in their worst nightmares. They were a hive-minded species that had evolved on a world with crushing gravity and toxic atmosphere. Their ships were not built, but grown from living tissue that could repair damage and adapt enemy weapons in real time. The creatures inside these biovessels were equally horrifying, with razor-sharp claws, acid for blood, and the ability to survive in hard vacuum. Colonel Ben Martinez spent his days training the 2,000 Marines who would be dropped onto alien worlds if ground combat became necessary. The ship's cargo bays had been converted into mock battle zones where soldiers practiced fighting in different gravities and atmospheric conditions. They learned to use their weapons in environments that would kill unprotected humans in seconds. Gravity on Earth was heavier than most inhabited worlds, which meant human soldiers were stronger and more durable than typical galactic species. This advantage had never been tested in real combat, but the training simulations suggested that humans could outfight most aliens in hand-to-hand combat. Their bones were denser, their muscles more powerful, and their reflexes faster than creatures. From gentler worlds, Dr. Amy Foster worked in the medical bay developing countermeasures for biological weapons that the Vrak were known to use. The aliens deployed viruses and toxins that had wiped out entire civilizations, but these weapons had been designed to work against specific alien biologies. Human immune systems had evolved on a world filled with deadly diseases and might prove resistant to extraterrestrial pathogens. The journey through hyperspace also gave the humans time to intercept more Ileni transmissions and learn about the species they were traveling to save. The crystalline beings communicated through harmonic vibrations and had built a peaceful civilization based on art science and philosophy. They had never developed military technology beyond basic defensive systems and were completely unprepared. For the Vrak invasion, each new message from the Ilani painted a darker picture of the situation in their home system. 3 of their 4 worlds had already fallen to the Vrak bioships, and the population of those planets was being systematically harvested. The creatures were used as food slave labor or raw material for growing new Vrak vessels. Only the main world of Alani Prime still showed signs of organized resistance. Lieutenant Sarah Johnson spent her time in the fighter bay working with the mechanics to modify human spacecraft for combat against biological enemies. The small single-pilot fighters had been designed for battles against human opponents using conventional weapons and armor. Fighting living ships that could heal themselves and adapt to attacks would require completely new tactics. Quantum torpedoes that each ship carried represented humanity's most advanced weapon technology. These devices could tear holes in space-time itself, creating explosions that released the energy of small stars. They had never been tested in actual combat, and no one was sure how they would perform against Vrak bioships, but the weapons represented humanity's best hope for victory. Captain Jake Sullivan commanded one of the destroyer-class vessels in the fleet and spent his time coordinating with the other ship captains to develop battle plans for every possible scenario. The humans had studied every available recording of Vrak combat tactics, but they knew the aliens would adapt their strategies once they encountered human weapons and fighting methods. Psychological pressure of the long journey began to affect some crew members as the reality of their mission became clear. They were traveling to fight an enemy that had conquered 17 star systems and destroyed countless civilizations. The humans were vastly outnumbered and fighting far from any possibility of reinforcement or retreat. Counselors worked around the clock to keep morale high and help soldiers deal with the stress. Commander Steve Parker had been chosen to make first contact with the surviving Eleni leadership once the fleet arrived in their system. He studied their language, customs, and culture while practicing the harmonic communication methods that the crystalline beings used. The first meeting between humans and aliens would happen in the middle of a war zone under the worst possible circumstances. The Vrak Empire had been expanding across the galaxy for over 2 centuries, using their biotechnology to create ships and weapons that grew stronger with each conquest. They viewed other species as either food sources or raw materials for building more vessels. The concept of mercy or negotiation was completely alien to their hive-minded psychology. As the months passed, Admiral Rogers received increasingly desperate messages from the Ilani describing the systematic destruction of their civilization. The bioships were strip mining entire continents while enslaving the population for forced labor. Children were separated from parents and used as test subjects for new biological weapons. The horrors described in these transmissions only strengthened the resolve of the human warriors. The humans also began to understand that their intervention in the Kepler system would announce their existence to the entire galaxy. Word of their involvement would spread to other species and potentially attract the attention of the Vrak Empire itself. Earth could become a target for invasion once the aliens learned about the new species that had dared to interfere with their conquest. Dr. Foster made a disturbing discovery while analyzing Elani biological data compared to human physiology. The crystalline beings were actually more fragile than most galactic species, while humans appeared to be unusually robust and hardy. Earth's harsh environment had created a species that was essentially built for war, even though they had spent most of their history fighting each other rather than alien invaders. The fleet's hyperspace engines began showing signs of strain after months of continuous operation at maximum speed. Chief Engineer Pete Williams worked with his teams across all 12 ships to maintain the delicate machinery that allowed faster-than-light travel. If even one ship suffered engine failure, it would be left behind in the void with no way to reach the battle zone. Major Thompson's intelligence analysis revealed that the Vrak had never encountered a species quite like humanity before. Most galactic civilizations had developed in relatively peaceful environments and relied on technology rather than physical prowess for survival. Humans combined advanced technology with biological advantages that made them uniquely suited for military conflict. Final month of the journey was spent in intensive combat preparation as the fleet approached the edge of the Kepler system. Every weapon was checked and rechecked while soldiers went through final training exercises. The moment they dropped out of hyperspace, they would be in enemy territory, facing an opponent that had never known defeat. Admiral Rogers called a final meeting of all ship captains and senior officers to review their battle plan one last time. The humans would emerge from hyperspace at maximum combat readiness and immediately engage any Vrak forces they encountered. There would be no warning, no negotiation, and no retreat until either the aliens were driven off or the human fleet was destroyed. When the 12 ships finally prepared to exit hyperspace near Kepler 442, the crew members said silent prayers to whatever gods they believed in. They were about to discover whether humanity's first journey to the stars would end in glorious victory or complete annihilation. The 12 ships of the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system and immediately found themselves in hell. The space around them was filled with debris from shattered worlds and the twisted remains of Elani defensive stations. Massive bioships moved between the inner planets like hungry predators feeding on the corpses of a once beautiful civilization. Admiral Frank Rogers stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty and felt his blood turn cold as he saw the scope of the destruction. 3 of the 4 Elani worlds showed no signs of life, while the 4th planet still glowed with the fires of desperate resistance. The Vrak invasion fleet was larger than anyone had imagined, with over 300 biovessels of various sizes swarming through the system. The alien ships looked like something from humanity's darkest nightmares. They were organic constructs of bone and flesh that pulsed with their own internal life. Some were as large as Earth's moon, while others were smaller, but moved with the deadly grace of space-borne predators. All of them radiated a sense of wrongness that made human skin crawl just from looking at them. Commander Steve Parker immediately began broadcasting on the harmonic frequencies that the Elani used for communication. Within minutes, he made contact with the surviving leadership on Elani Prime, who responded with a mixture of joy and disbelief. They had sent their distress call into the void hoping someone might hear, but they never expected anyone to actually answer their plea for help. Elani described themselves as crystalline beings who had evolved on a world of music and light. Their civilization was built around principles of harmony and cooperation that made them completely unprepared for the brutal realities of galactic warfare. They had watched helplessly as their people were harvested by the Vrak bioships and their world stripped of all biological material. The first Ilani that Commander Parker spoke with was a being called Crystal Song, who served as one of the remaining military coordinators. Through harmonic translation, they explained that the Vrak had arrived in their system 6 months ago and immediately began systematic destruction of all inhabited worlds. The aliens showed no interest in negotiation or surrender and seemed to view the Ilani as nothing more than raw materials. The Vrak detected the human fleet within minutes of their arrival and responded with typical efficiency. A formation of 50. Bioships immediately changed course and began moving toward the human vessels, while transmitting a simple message on multiple frequencies. The translation was chilling in its directness. Surrender or be consumed, Admiral. Rogers read the alien ultimatum and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. These creatures had spent centuries terrorizing peaceful species and harvesting entire civilizations without ever facing real opposition. They were about to learn what happened when they threatened innocent people while humans were watching. The Admiral's response was broadcast on the same frequencies the Vrak had used, and his words would be remembered throughout galactic history. This is Admiral Frank Rogers of the Earth Defense Force. You have exactly 60 seconds to withdraw from this system before we demonstrate why attacking defenseless people was the last mistake your species will ever make. Come and take it. The Vrak response was immediate and overwhelming. The 50 bioships that had been approaching suddenly accelerated to attack speed while releasing clouds of smaller organisms that swarmed toward the human fleet like living missiles. Behind them, the main Vrak force began moving away from Ilani Prime to engage this new threat that dared to challenge their supremacy. Lieutenant Sarah Johnson launched from the USS Liberty in her experimental fighter craft named Valkyrie along with 49 other human pilots. The small ships were vastly outnumbered by the Vrak organisms, but they had advantages that the aliens had never encountered before. Human reflexes had been honed by growing up under Earth's heavy gravity, and the pilots could handle acceleration forces that would crush most other species. First engagement took place near the gas giant Kepler 442c, where the human destroyers opened fire with their kinetic weapons. Tungsten rods accelerated to significant fractions of light speed, struck the Vrak bioships with devastating effect. The aliens had evolved defenses against energy weapons, but had never faced simple projectiles moving at such incredible velocities. Bioships tried to adapt their armor to deflect the kinetic strikes, but the tungsten rods punched through their living hulls like bullets through paper. Alien blood and organic fluid sprayed into space as the Vrak vessels died in ways their species had never experienced before. The hive mind that controlled them reeled in shock as ships that were supposed to be nearly indestructible were torn apart by primitive projectiles. Captain Jake Sullivan commanded the destroyer USS Chicago and led his ship into the heart of the enemy formation. His crew had trained for years in simulated combat, but nothing had prepared them for the reality of fighting living ships that screamed when they died. The biovessels tried to board the human ships by growing appendages that could penetrate their hulls, but they met with nasty surprises. The humans had designed their ships specifically for fighting boarding actions with sealed compartments automated. Defenses and corridors that could be flooded with toxic gas at a moment's notice. When Vrak organisms managed to breach the hull, they found themselves facing human Marines wearing powered armor and wielding weapons designed to kill in confined spaces. Colonel Ben Martinez led the first boarding action when his assault shuttle crashed through the membrane of a wounded Vrak cruiser. His Marines moved through the alien ship's organic corridors fighting creatures that had never faced opponents from a high-gravity world. The humans were stronger, faster, and more aggressive than anything the Vrak had encountered in their centuries of conquest. Turning point of the first battle came when Lieutenant Sarah Johnson broke through the Vrak defensive formation and delivered a quantum torpedo directly into their command vessel. The weapon tore a hole in space-time itself, and the resulting explosion vaporized the massive bioship along with 12 smaller vessels that were too close to the Chew. Detonation. The quantum explosion sent shockwaves through both fleets as reality itself seemed to buckle under the forces involved. The Vrak had never seen anything like this weapon that attacked the fundamental structure of the universe itself. Their bioships could adapt to conventional weapons, but there was no defense against an attack that unmade matter at the quantum level. The surviving Vrak vessels began to retreat as their hive mind processed the implications of what they had just witnessed. These new enemies possessed weapons and tactics that the Empire had never encountered in 2 centuries of galactic conquest. The humans fought with a combination of primitive brutality and advanced technology that seemed impossible. Commander Parker maintained contact with the Alani throughout the battle and could hear the joy and amazement in their harmonic voices as they watched the human fleet tear through Vrak forces that had seemed invincible. Crystal Song transmitted that they had never imagined such fierce warriors existed anywhere in the galaxy. The first engagement lasted only 4 hours, but it changed everything for both the humans and the galaxy at large. The Vrak had lost 60 bioships, including one of their command vessels, while the human fleet suffered only minor damage to 2 destroyers. More importantly, the aliens had learned that they were no longer the apex predators. They believed themselves to be. Admiral Rogers knew this was only the beginning as he watched the surviving Vrak ships regroup near the inner planets. The aliens would adapt their tactics and bring overwhelming numbers to bear in the next engagement. But the humans had shown that the Vrak could be hurt and killed, and that knowledge would spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire. Sleeping giant of Earth had drawn first blood among the stars, and the universe would never be the same. Word of the battle would reach every civilized species within weeks as the Alani broadcasted news of their salvation across the galactic communication networks. Humanity had announced its arrival on the galactic stage by doing what no other species had managed in 2 centuries. They had made the Vrak Empire bleed. The Vrak Empire had ruled through fear and overwhelming force for over 2 centuries, but they had never faced an enemy quite like humanity before. After their shocking defeat in the first engagement, the aliens began adapting their tactics with the efficiency that had made them masters of galactic warfare. They brought additional bioships from the outer system and began developing new strategies to deal with human weapons. Admiral Frank Rogers watched the enemy movements from the bridge of the USS Liberty and knew that the next battle would be far more difficult than the first. The Vrak had learned to disperse their formations to minimize damage from quantum torpedoes, and they were growing new types of armor specifically designed to deflect kinetic weapons. The aliens were proving why they had conquered 17 star systems. The second wave of Vrak attacks came 3 days after the first battle, when 200 bioships emerged from the shadow of Kepler 442b and moved toward the human fleet in a coordinated assault. This time, the aliens used different tactics, spreading their vessels across a wide front and attacking from multiple directions, simultaneously to prevent the humans from concentrating their firepower. Lieutenant Sarah Johnson led her fighter squadron against the leading edge of the Vrak formation, but quickly discovered that the aliens had learned from their previous encounter. The bioships now carried swarms of smaller organisms that moved like living point defense systems, intercepting human fighters before they could deliver their weapons. The space around the alien fleet became a deadly maze of organic missiles, and defensive creatures. Captain Jake Sullivan found his destroyer Chicago surrounded by Vrak vessels that had adapted their hulls to better absorb kinetic impacts. The tungsten rods that had been so devastating in the first battle were now being deflected or absorbed by bioarmor that could redistribute the energy of impacts across the entire ship structure. The aliens were proving their reputation for rapid adaptation. The human fleet was forced to fall back toward Eleni Prime as the Vrak pressed their numerical advantage with ruthless efficiency. The bioships seemed to learn from every human tactic within minutes of encountering it, and their hive mind allowed them to coordinate attacks with precision that no individual species could match. For the first time since arriving in the system, Admiral Rogers began to wonder if they had bitten off more than they could chew. Turning point came when Colonel Ben Martinez led the first ground assault on Vrak positions that had been established. On the surface of Eleni Prime, the aliens had landed their ships on the crystalline world and were systematically harvesting the population while stripping the planet of biological resources. The human Marines who dropped from orbit to stop them were about to demonstrate why growing up on Earth made them uniquely dangerous. Sergeant Mike Davis was among the first wave of Marines to hit the ground on Eleni Prime, and he immediately noticed something important about the planetary environment. The gravity was only 60% of Earth normal, which meant that human soldiers could move faster, jump higher, and fight longer than they ever could on their home world. The advantage that had helped them in space combat was even more pronounced on the surface. Vrak ground forces had evolved on a world with crushing gravity and toxic atmosphere, but they had never encountered opponents who were even better adapted to harsh conditions. Human soldiers moved through the battlefield like supernatural creatures, easily outrunning and outfighting aliens that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. Their powered armor made them nearly invincible, while their weapons turned Vrak bioconstructs into smoking ruins. Private Jenny Walsh made the discovery that changed everything when she was wounded in a firefight with Vrak soldiers and her blood splattered across several alien organisms. The creatures immediately began convulsing and dying as human biochemistry proved to be violently toxic to Vrak biology. The aliens had evolved on a completely different world with utterly alien chemistry, and exposure to human bodily fluids caused rapid cellular breakdown. Dr. Amy Foster received samples of the interaction between human blood and Vrak tissue and quickly realized that humanity had stumbled upon the perfect biological weapon. Every human soldier was carrying antibodies, hormones, and cellular structures that were deadly poison to their enemies. The species that had terrorized the galaxy with biological warfare was completely vulnerable to the basic biology of Earth's children. Within hours, Dr. Foster had developed weaponized versions of human antibodies that could be loaded into conventional ammunition. The Marines on Eleni Prime suddenly found themselves armed with bullets that could kill Vrak organisms with a single hit, regardless of where they struck. The aliens had no defense against weapons that attacked their basic cellular structure. Ground war on Eleni Prime became a rout as human forces pushed the Vrak back from every position they had established. The aliens discovered that their bioarmor was useless against weapons that could kill them at the molecular level, while their own biological weapons had no effect on humans, whose immune systems had been forged by Earth's deadly environment commander. Steve Parker worked with the surviving Eleni to coordinate the liberation of their people from Vrak processing centers where they were being prepared for harvesting. The crystalline beings were amazed by the ferocity and effectiveness of their human rescuers, who fought like demons and seemed to be immune to every weapon. The young too. Vrak possessed. The space battle around Eleni Prime shifted dramatically when human ships began firing ammunition loaded with weaponized human antibodies. The Vrak bioships that had adapted to deflect kinetic weapons suddenly found themselves dying from simple bullets that carried Earth biology into their living hulls. Massive vessels that had seemed nearly indestructible began dissolving as human biochemistry ate through their organic structure. Admiral Rogers ordered a general advance as the Vrak fleet began falling apart under the assault of biological weapons they could not adapt to or defend against. The aliens had built their entire military strategy around their ability to absorb and counter enemy attacks, but there was no counter to the fundamental incompatibility between Earth biology and their own cellular structure. The battle that followed lasted for 6 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Vrak invasion force. Not a single bioship escaped to carry word back to the Empire about the new weapons that humanity had deployed. The aliens who had conquered 17 star systems were wiped out by an enemy they had never imagined could exist. The surviving Ilani emerged from their hiding places to find their world littered with the dissolving remains of Vrak bioships and ground installations. The creatures that had seemed unstoppable just days before had been reduced organic sludge by weapons that used the basic chemistry of life itself as ammunition. Major Kate Thompson coordinated the intelligence-gathering operation that followed the battle as human teams examined Vrak technology and biological samples. The aliens had been more advanced than humanity in many ways, but they had never encountered a species from such a hostile world that their basic biology was incompatible with galactic norms. The victory on Ilani Prime sent shockwaves through both the galactic community and the Vrak Empire itself. Word spread quickly through interstellar communication networks that a new species had appeared that could not only fight the Vrak but could destroy them completely using weapons that the aliens had no defense against. Crystal Song and the other Ilani leaders gathered to thank their human rescuers in a ceremony that marked the first formal diplomatic contact between Earth and an alien civilization. The crystalline beings could barely comprehend that strangers from across the galaxy had traveled so far to save them from certain extinction. Admiral Rogers knew that the real war was just beginning as he received reports of Vrak fleets massing in nearby systems. The Empire would not ignore the destruction of an entire invasion force, and they would come looking for the species that had dared to interfere with their conquest. But humanity had proven that the galaxy's greatest predators could be stopped by the children of a world so dangerous that it had forged them into living weapons. Deathworld Advantage had revealed itself in the most dramatic way possible, as Earth's harsh environment proved to be the perfect training ground for galactic warfare. Humanity had found their place among the stars not as explorers or diplomats, but as the warriors who answered when innocence called for help. The Battle of Kepler lasted 14 days from the first human arrival to the final destruction of the Vrak invasion force. When the fighting ended, not a single alien ship remained intact, and the 3 conquered Ilani worlds were free for the first time in 6 months. The victory was complete, but Admiral Frank Rogers knew that the real consequences were just beginning. News of humanity's intervention spread across the galaxy with the speed of quantum communication as the Ilani broadcast their salvation to every civilized species they could contact. The crystalline beings had never been warlike, but they understood the importance of sharing this information with others who might face similar threats from the Vrak Empire. Within days, the galactic communication networks were buzzing with reports of a new species that had appeared from an unknown region of space and completely destroyed a Vrak invasion force. Most civilizations initially dismissed these reports as impossible, since the Empire had never suffered a major defeat in over 2 centuries of expansion. The Galactic Council was an ancient institution, dominated by species that had achieved interstellar travel millions of years before humanity had even evolved. These elder races had grown comfortable with the established order, where the Vrak Empire controlled vast regions of space, while peaceful species cowered behind defensive barriers and paid tribute for protection. Representative Harmony Voice spoke for the Altair Collective when she addressed the emergency session of the Galactic Council 3 weeks after the Battle of Kepler. Her species had been among the first to receive detailed reports from the Ilani about their human rescuers, and the implications were staggering for every civilization in the galaxy. The Council initially refused to believe that a previously unknown species could have defeated the Vrak so decisively. The Empire's bioships were considered the most advanced military technology in known space, and their hive-mind coordination made them nearly unbeatable in combat. The idea that primitive kinetic weapons and biological warfare could overcome such advantages seemed impossible. Captain Ellen Brooks led the diplomatic mission that followed the military victory as humanity began the delicate process of introducing themselves to galactic civilization. She had been chosen for her combination of military experience and diplomatic training, but nothing had prepared her for the complexity of interstellar politics. First formal contact between humanity and the Galactic Council took place on the neutral station of Deep Space Nine, where representatives from 47 different species gathered to meet the new arrivals. Captain Brooks walked into the assembly chamber wearing her Earth Defense Force uniform and carrying a simple message from President Helen Davis. The human proposal was straightforward and revolutionary. Earth would establish the Terran Defense Compact, offering military protection to any species willing to join. A mutual defense pact against aggressive empires like the Vrak. Member species would contribute resources and intelligence, while humanity provided the military muscle needed to stop predatory civilizations. Response from the Council was immediate and divided. Some species welcomed the idea of having protection against the Vrak, while others worried about what kind of civilization could produce such effective warriors. The elder races that dominated the Council were particularly concerned about losing their position of authority to upstart newcomers. Ambassador Crystal Song represented the Alani in the Council proceedings and provided detailed testimony about human military capabilities and their behavior during the liberation of her home system. The crystalline beings described warriors who fought with incredible ferocity, but showed mercy to defeated enemies and protected innocent civilians. The Zephyrian Trade Union was among the first to express interest in joining the Terran Defense Compact after their merchant fleets had suffered repeated attacks from Vrak raiders. Representative Windwalker explained that his people had been forced to pay enormous tribute to the Empire for decades and welcomed the chance to fight back. The aquatic Kanians sent a delegation led by Deep Current, who described how their water worlds had been under constant threat from Vrak bioships that could drain entire oceans. The amphibious beings had developed no effective defenses against such attacks, and desperately needed outside help. Opposition to the human proposal came primarily from the ancient crystalline authority, whose representative Diamond Thought argued that introducing such aggressive newcomers to galactic affairs would destabilize a careful balance that had maintained peace for millions of years. The elder beings viewed humanity as dangerous primitives who would bring chaos to civilized space. The debate was interrupted when urgent reports arrived of another Vrak attack on the Rigel system, where the peaceful gardener species was being systematically harvested by a massive biofleet. The Empire had responded to their defeat at Kepler by launching an even larger invasion to demonstrate that their power remained. Unbroken Admiral Rogers received authorization from Earth to intervene in the Rigel crisis and demonstrate that humanity's victory at Kepler had not been a fluke. The 12-ship human fleet departed for the Rigel system, while the Galactic Council continued debating whether to formally recognize Earth as a legitimate interstellar power. The Second Battle of Rigel lasted only 8 hours as human forces employed the lessons learned from their previous engagement with the Vrak. The bioships that had adapted to counter kinetic weapons were completely unprepared for biological warfare that attacked their fundamental cellular structure. Another Vrak invasion force was annihilated without losing a single human vessel. News of the second victory reached the Galactic Council. While they were still debating the human proposal, it immediately changed the tone of the discussions. Species that had been hesitant to align themselves with Earth suddenly began requesting immediate admission to the Terran Defense Compact. Within 6 months, 47 different civilizations had signed defense agreements with humanity, ranging from simple non-aggression pacts to full military alliances. The elder races that had dominated galactic politics for millions of years suddenly found themselves dealing with a coalition of younger species. Organized around Earth's military protection, the Vrak Empire's response was swift and brutal as they launched simultaneous attacks on 12 different human-allied worlds in an attempt to overwhelm the Terran Defense Force. Admiral Rogers divided his fleet to respond to multiple threats while calling for reinforcements from Earth's shipyards that were working around the clock to build new vessels. Third Battle of Centauri Prime became legendary when Colonel Ben Martinez led a ground assault against a Vrak bioship that had landed on the planet's surface. His Marines fought their way through the alien vessel's organic corridors, while broadcasting their attack live to human recruitment centers across known space. The images of human soldiers dissolving, Vrak bio constructs with weapons that used Earth. Chemistry as ammunition inspired millions of young people to volunteer for military service. Humanity had found its calling as the galaxy's protectors, and recruitment stations were overwhelmed with applications from species across known space DR. Amy Foster's research into biological warfare expanded as she worked with alien scientists to develop new weapons specifically designed to exploit Vrak vulnerabilities. The Empire's greatest strength had become their greatest weakness, as every species they had previously conquered now had access to weapons that could destroy bioships completely. The final confrontation came when the Vrak Empire committed their entire reserve fleet to a massive attack on Earth itself in an attempt to eliminate the source of their troubles. Over 800 bioships emerged from hyperspace near humanity's home system, only to discover that Earth's children had been preparing for this moment. The Battle of Sol lasted 3 days and ended with the complete destruction of the Vrak Empire's military might. Human forces supported by allied fleets from dozens of species fought with desperate fury to protect their homeworld. While demonstrating the full extent of their biological weapons technology, the fighting ended. The galaxy had changed forever. The Vrak Empire that had terrorized civilized space for centuries was broken, beyond repair, while humanity had established itself as the dominant military power in known space. The Terran Defense Compact grew to include over 200 member species within 5 years. The sleeping giant had not only awakened, but had become the galaxy's guardian and protector. Earth's children had found their destiny among the stars, not as conquerors, but as the warriors who answered when innocent people called for help across the vast darkness of space. Admiral Rogers stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt USS Liberty 5 years after that first desperate journey to answer an alien distress call. The galaxy was still a dangerous place, filled with predators and prey, but now there was a species that stood ready to defend those who could not defend themselves. Age of human expansion had begun, and it was written in the gratitude of the saved and the fear of those who would prey upon the innocent. Humanity had learned that their harsh homeworld had given them advantages that made them uniquely suited to be the galaxy's protectors, and they embraced that role with the same determination that had carried them to the stars.